Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 11 of the Veil Riders Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Let's go. Chapter 11. Regal Formalities.
What is all the yelling about?
Queen Madmirren murmured to herself, hearing the loud clamoring of voices from beyond the doors. She knew it would take a little bit of time to get him in here, but it was starting to be rather annoying. Her sons kept fidgeting and her royal guards seemed to be getting nervous. The others had gotten a good look at the people outside when they escorted them here. And every guard in the castle knew they wouldn't even last a few minutes against the little force outside. An usher came sprinting down the hall and waved his hand a few times, gesturing for all the gathered nobles to stop drooping or leaning on the walls.
They're coming! Quickly now, look lively, ye lords and ladies!
Queen Madmirren gave the front of her dress one last smoothing, even though she was sure her lady-in-waiting had done it 4 or 5 times herself. When she started to hear the rhythmic thud of boots, she rose up onto her feet, still a few heads higher than everyone else on her little raised stage. At this gesture, everyone seemed to come even more alive, as they knew the show was on for real. She should have been doing this in the throne room proper, but seeing the empty chair beside her was just too much to bear at the current time. She caught sight of Yule as he was walking just behind her steward, and she couldn't help but tilt her head slightly.
That's Yule?
She murmured to her marshal, Cern, who was on the other side of her. The valley elf nodded. Yes, my queen.
He's not nearly as hairy or ugly as the drawings make him out to be. He just looks like a very tall dwarf.
Queen Madmirren said with a quiet chuckle, but it died in her throat when she saw the red-haired woman walking with her arm in his. Cern already knew what she was looking at, and had heard all the same rumors. Yes, my queen, that may very well be Alavara.
The blood-touched.
Queen Madmirren whispered to herself, and her heart fluttered with even more renewed hope.
She is real.
Benhelm, frustrated due to Yule keeping pace with him and not letting him gain distance to announce them, instead decided to do it on the move, raising his voice to all those within the gallery.
Warlord Tom Yule and his command staff. Warlord Yule has asked to be only addressed as Yule, however.
Benhelm then raised a hand towards Queen Madmirren, more for Yule's sake than anything else.
Yule, I present to you Queen Madmirren, rightful ruler of the Irani Islands and Iron Mother of Chapsdale City, ruler of these lands till her king does wake.
Yule strode forward into the place he was obviously supposed to go, and finally got his eyes on this queen he had heard so much about. He looked at her for a solid 2 seconds, then inclined his head at a slight angle, closing his eyes as he did. Unbeknownst to him, Alavara had done the same, taking the cue from his mind because she was frankly in a panic of how to curtsy in trousers. To Yule, the queen looked soul-tired. She was lovely, regal in all the right ways, but something was off about her. Her eyes held a kind of pain gained from endured suffering, and they betrayed how she held herself, or the air she was hoping to display. Then there was the fact Yule didn't think she was an actual valley elf. He presumed it was the ear caps, and he had seen enough elves to know a southern elf when he saw one. Her sharp blue eyes and white hair was a dead giveaway, but at the same time, she wore those ear caps so that her ears looked longer. He found that odd. Yule raised his head back to straight and took her in further. She was tense, but tense in the way someone with a forlorn hope was. She reeked of it, really, and he figured he had another Prince Nim situation on his hands. At the same time, he had a distinct feeling this was a far more emotional issue, and he could see the queen dart her eyes to Alavara with the same air of sorrowful desire. "Ma'am," Yule said, patting Alavara's hand in the crook of his arm, "I am extremely appreciative of your hospitality."
The honor is all mine.
Queen Madmiren said with a gentle incline of the head.
I am pleased that you accepted my invitation. Can you do me a kindness and introduce your command staff?
"Of course," Yule said with a nod, taking a step to the side with Alavara as he pointed with his free hand. "This is Sergeant Major Domino and his mate, Severus, Queen of the Himalaya Harpies. Sergeant Major Chicks, Sergeant Major Donahue, Sergeant Major Kentucky, Sergeant Major Wulf, Sergeant Major Piper, First Sergeant Erinda Caine, Medical Staff Sergeant Yethis, Specialist Maccarat, Specialist Riozo, and Private Chikily."
And?
Queen Madmiren said politely, gesturing towards the Fae standing just to the left of Yule. Yule's eyes slowly rolled over to Ramella, who was grinning at him widely and waiting for him to introduce her. "And Irvin Ramella, Dracanic Fae Turncoat." There was an immediate wave of murmuring and whispering that erupted around the gallery, but a stern look from Queen Madmiren brought it all down to silence.
A draconic fae in my home, and one that is on our side? I am honored to have you here, Andante Ramella.
Queen Madmiren said, giving Ramella a warm smile. Ramella smiled back, but more in a curious way than one of greeting.
And of course, introduce your lady,
Queen Madmiren said, nodding politely to Alavara. Fuck. Yule thought to himself, turning to look at Alavara. Her blood-red eyes looked at his, and she couldn't stop herself from letting the quirk of a smile adorn the corner of her mouth. Her eyebrows slowly raised just enough to let Yule know that she, too, was curious what he was going to introduce her as. Yule had been hoping this wouldn't happen, and had been dreading trying to figure out what to call her. He had been thinking of titles and names ever since the little old Brim Touch had introduced them, and even now his mind was still scrambling. Girlfriend was too simple, too childish. But at the same time, he sure as hell couldn't call her his wife. They weren't even married. Even as he thought, they didn't have any other titles that fit, and he only used the term mate with Severus because she hated it. An idea came to him, and he held his free hand towards Alavara, palm up. "Ma'am, this is my romance. Alavara." Yule's mind went blank for a single heartbeat. He had completely forgotten Alavara's last name. It was quite possibly the worst time for a brain fart, and he knew he could not look like a moron here, so he had to pull the pin on the nuclear option. Yule. Yule audibly heard the heads of his command staff turn towards him, as well as the short little hiccup of breath from Alavara.
Romance?
Queen Madmiren asked with raised brows.
Is this a human word?
Yule nodded with a smile, despite the sweat prickling at his shoulder blades and back, due to both nerves and Alavara gripping her fingers into his arm. "Yes, ma'am."
Oh, how exotic!
Queen Madmiren giggled, and the tension in the room broke with refined patience.
Are you hungry? I have had my staff preparing quite the meal.
Yule nodded. "I am more than sure that everyone here could definitely tuck in, ma'am."
We have quite a few seats left. You may go and fetch more of your higher-ranking officers if you wish to send your page.
Queen Madmiren said, then clapped her hands again a few times.
Come now! Food gets cold and wine turns warm. Let's not waste time! We have new people from a faraway land to meet. A polite cheer rose up from the nobles and other higher-ranking officials in the room, and Yule turned to Chikily. "Go grab some of the lone wanderers and a few of the first sergeants, Chikily, then come back here," Yule said. Then Chicks leaned up into his ear.
"Alavara Yule?"
she hissed, giving Yule a jab in the ribs with her thumb.
Hell of a time to announce that kind of thing.
Yule grinned at her angrily while speaking lowly. "Shut the fuck up and mingle while we walk."
This way, please.
An usher said, the Valley Elf offering them a directional hand that pointed down another large hallway.
Yule.
Alavara murmured into Yule's shoulder, trying to keep her wide, toothy smile hidden from those around her as they slowly walked forward. She, of course, knew full damn well that Yule had panicked. She had been reading his mind the entire time. She also knew that Yule didn't feel shame at saying it, which caused something in her chest to flutter with warm flame. Yule turned to look at her, but the arm of Domino came around his shoulder.
Well, look at the little happy couple. Congratulations.
Domino said with a dark chuckle, and Yule pressed his lips together.
Looks like I get to collect on a few bets.
Severus sidled up beside Alavara, tapping her on the shoulder.
If elf is in duress, blink twice. Severus, get you out of here.
Alavara snorted out a laugh, clinging to Yule's arm like they were newlyweds while Chicks came up beside Severus.
So, what are we thinking? Open bar, casual, but not too casual in dress code. Perhaps we can find some pure white harpies to fly over you two while dropping seeds or something? I bet we can find a baker to make a stupid big cake.
Chicks said with a happy sigh, running a hand through her blonde hair.
To think I would live to see the Great Bear himself finally get tamed down and housebroken. It's one for the ages, I tell you.
I am going to kill you all when we are done with this dinner. Yule growled out quietly in English through smiling teeth, nodding his head and greeting those who did the same to him in Tunka. Hi there, thanks for the warm welcome. Wulf on the other side, shaking hands with some of the nobles who approached him, spoke out in English to Yule.
Oh, leave them alone. We all knew it was gonna happen eventually. I think it's sweet he did it here, though. Make it officially and royally recognized.
Royally recognized.
Alavara murmured to herself and blushed fiercely. She also felt sick again, but managed to tamper that feeling down with a little bit of steady breathing. Chikily came back before they had cleared the long hallway, as Yule was stopping and greeting what seemed like every noble, minor noble, and city official in this damn place. Soon dozens of lone wanderers were roaming the hallways, some of them still wrapped in bandages. Nellie was getting quite a bit of attention due to her folded sleeve. Curiously, though, it came from mostly the women of the hall who were keenly interested in the female human warrior. Rusty, Ben, and Cody were quickly in discussions with members of the city's engineers guild, the like-minded people finding instant kinship in each other. The lunch itself may as well have been a feast, and Yule was arching a brow at the kind of expense that Queen Madmiran had forfeited to put on such a show. Of course, he was seated right next to the woman, Alavara at his side, and Erinda Caine just on the other side of her to keep her safe. The wine itself must have cost a fortune, and it was rather delicate in taste for all things considered, something that Yule actually quite liked. He did notice that Alavara was watering hers down, something he had never actually seen her do, but guessed she may have been wanting to pace herself. He was quickly getting annoyed that he wasn't allowed to get his own food, and had to ask a dining room staff member to get it for him. These people were in the middle of the table, as there was a body-sized slit that allowed staff to move up and down the table to dish out servings of food. Yule also surmised there was a staircase in there somewhere, as a random dining room staff member would pop up from nowhere with a hot tray of whatever it was they were bringing out. Queen Madmiran naturally made conversation with Yule as they ate, and he found himself having to switch gears in terms of terminology and tone of voice.
I have to say, I was hoping you'd arrive on one of those marvelous machines of yours I keep hearing about.
Queen Madmiran said as she took a sip from her tinted wineglass.
The metal wagons that shoot fire from metal wands.
Yule smiled. Yes, I would have too, but I'm afraid our fuel lines cannot stretch this far.
A pity.
Queen Madmiran said, and she meant it.
How did your conflict at Limstory go? I was getting constant reports about it as the days wore on.
We took casualties, Yule replied, buttering what looked a lot like cornbread to him, but not too many to cause us a lot of distress. We bloodied each other good, but we came out on top in the end. Queen Madmiran watched Yule as she chewed her food. The human ate much like her husband did, with the main goal being to feed the body as efficiently as possible. She did like that his romance ate the same way as she did, taking their time and actually enjoying the meal slowly. She was glad that the washing basins went over well before the meal. Sometimes her guests came from the far west or east and would pick their noses into the basins or blow them into them. Queen Madmeran remembered with disgust when a dwarven thane from the east reaches had hawked his throat and spat into the bowl, and she had to have it rinsed immediately. Yule, on the other hand, just washed his hands and dried them on the towel the staff held out for him. Rather neat and tidy for a warlord to go about things.
I understand you have a close relationship with the Rendon Nung.
Queen Madmeran asked Yule, waiting for him to stop chewing out of courtesy. Yule nodded. We brokered a deal together to make sure things stay peaceful. I don't step on his toes and he doesn't step on mine. I have no interest in commanding land. I have a job to do in making war. That is all.
That decision did raise a few eyebrows.
Queen Madmeran replied, taking a sip from her wine glass as musicians began to play soft, joyful tunes.
Many believed you were going to seize power. Instead, you just command the roads and battlefields.
Keeps the merchants and villages safe, and the royalty can focus on the paperwork. Yule said with a shrug, taking a deep pull of his wine glass. Erinda Caine had already figured out none of the food was poisoned, so he was drinking freely. Coco and I keep the entire Confederation safe and do the heavy lifting in combat. Plus they pay me. Queen Madmeran chuckled.
Yes, they would be wise to, knowing the scale of power you wield. Quite a few nobles and royal families fear you, you know.
Why's that? Yule asked, now turning to look at her fully. Queen Madmeran gestured idly with her two-pronged fork.
Because of the loyalty you wield. You command, in my estimations, the largest army this side of the Moria, and all of them swear fealty easily to you, and in such numbers as well. Some wager that it must be some kind of human spell you had casted over them.
While Queen Madmeran giggled good-naturedly, Yule did as well, though his was a smidge more forced. He remembered the odd little things some of his humans were doing, and he did, some nights, wonder if he could do the same.
Of course, the reputation of your deeds and those of your men certainly do help with recruitment, I'm sure.
Queen Madmeran added, nodding to a servant who refilled her wine. My deeds? Yule asked her, kissing Alavara's knuckles to make sure she didn't feel left out before turning back to the southern elf. What deeds would that be? Queen Madmeran took another drink, setting down her glass.
Maintaining royal lines such as the Rendon Nung and not taking the power for your own was a good start. Then the great story of your men releasing the unfortunate victims of the debt farms in Alberdand. I'm sure you've heard of the survivors joining up in your ranks and issuing swift revenge killings, pointing out those who allowed such crimes and tried to hide amongst the populace.
Yule did know of the revenge killings, as well as the hangings when they were found, but he found it not his place to keep those people from their revenge. He cleared his throat, twitching his eyebrows up in response. I see.
A lot of the other royals fear you, you know.
Queen Madmeran mused, swirling the wine in her glass.
Your men operate in other territories with little fear. Entire armies standing down when they see the great patch upon shoulder and cap.
I am aware, Yule replied, taking a bite of a cheese puff to give himself a moment to think before he spoke. The Pendulum, as well as the Rendon Nung Royal House, have made that easier within the Immelnor's Confederation. We have a common enemy that infests the lands, and we are working together to rid said lands of that enemy. Prince Nim has opened a door for us in Alberdand, and we walked through it. However, the rest cannot be said of Troika, nor of the Otterus Range. I don't believe the same can be said of the Aranani Highlands either. Queen Madmeran leaned forward on her elbows, the sleeves of her dress draping elegantly along her arms as she held her wine glass lazily.
My husband, King Jacoby.
What is the family line name? Yule asked politely before she could get too far, having fished a small booklet from a pocket and a locally made writing pencil.
The Erlin Nung. My apologies, I should have pointed that out earlier. It is odd how Valley Elves attach their titles to their first name and not the last. Caused me quite a bit of trouble when I got married, always saying it backwards.
Queen Madmiren said with a smile, watching as Yule politely scritched along in his booklet. Yule nodded. Caused me quite a bit of confusion as well. I kept calling Shay King Randan for a while. He always made fun of me for it.
I'm sure he took much joy in it. Kings don't often get to tut about how to say their title correctly.
Queen Madmiren said with a chuckle, then picked up where she left off.
My husband, King Jacoby, took a lot of time and effort in uniting this place. It used to be an absolute honeycomb of little royal families, city-states, and minute countries. He united them all, either by politics or force, into Angendal, and united the Aranani Highlands. We ruled in prosperity. No one went unfed, no one went without. Then the orcs came and sacked the regions north and south of the Comfort. The centaurs saw their moment and swept in, taking the lands from the orcs and pushing them further south. I petitioned for the return of these lands, but they claimed them as spoils of war, and have refused to give back the long grass, till fields, and anfa fields.
Yule took note of how bitter she looked as she said this, even seeing her nose wrinkle with subtle anger.
I've managed to lose half of the lands we held before my husband fell ill, and all I have left is whatever lies east of the Long Rill River.
Queen Madmiren said ruefully, then turned her gaze fully to Yule.
I would take hot iron to my own eyes, if it meant seeing my husband's land reunited. So believe you me, Warlord Yule, the same can be said of the Aranani Highlands.
Yule stared at her, Alavara peeking past his shoulder as she felt both of their minds dip into a dark place. But Yule instead tilted his head down, looking at his booklet as he made a few more scritches. I will keep this in mind, Queen Madmiren, Yule said, the two of them sharing the same smile, a smile of silent, knowing collaboration. What do you know of the Odorous Range? Yule asked her, slowly flipping the page of his booklet over. Queen Madmiren snorted.
A land of disputes. I didn't mind letting the dwarves into the mountains. We never had much to do with them. But the Odorous Range is a bitter place. Historically, the range has always belonged to the Adorned and Brim-Touched, and holds some of the oldest cities in the land. But refugees fleeing Alberdond are suffocating those cities. The orcs had taken a few major areas and sacked one of the larger towns. I believe it is called Ashartaran. The centaurs have moved in, trading land back and forth with the orcs, land that the Adorned and Brim-Touched know is their own. They have nearly come to blows with the centaurs while waging open war with the orcs. King Hunehorn is becoming frustrated, as his once pure towns are being muddled with Oni, Satyr, and elves. The predations of Thane Stefnir and her taking of all the major mountains to the south has done nothing to quell that anger, and he even had to grant title to that little horn dog, Sivin, just to allow someone else to manage a part of the range itself. I have a feeling he'll be sending you letters before long.
Does he expect me to take care of the orcs or to root out the rest of the people he sees as invaders? Yule asked her, taking a bite of his buttered bread and mulling over the reports from the place as he chewed. The land is a hot spot of conflict, with southern elves running all over the place using Fey help, mercantile guilds trying to carve out power, the orcs and the centaur. I mean, I have technically already had letters from his council saying they would look the other way with my special operations teams putting out fires.
I expect he'll want you to put things back how they were, and knowing the coffers of Abston, he'll pay up front to see it happen.
Queen Madmiren murmured, knowing that King Hunehorn sat upon the kind of money that could likely buy half the lands he was missing.
Though I believe you are running into a problem in Troika that you will also find in the Odorous Range.
The traditionalists? Yule asked her, rolling his eyes as he took another bite of his bread. Queen Madmiren snickered.
So, the rumors are true.
Quite. Yule muttered, his face souring. Troika is proving difficult. There are 2 Bannerlords there, Greffer and Lestina. Bannerlord Lestina is a spitfire, and I like her so far in our letters, and she embraced us with open arms, as did her people, and allowed us to form a military training operations base in Penkurth. The problem is with Bannerlord Greffer.
The staunch traditionalist and slave to the old ways of his people.
Queen Madmiran said with a wry grin.
He loves war, and put a lot of the paperwork into his own council so he can do as he pleases. I would wager he would join this war in a heartbeat, but his council works against him at every step. They hate that he allowed Lenstina to even exist after killing Nadatam in the rite of blood crowning.
From what I understand, she completely humiliated that man and fought the fully armored knight in nothing but a puffy shirt and pants, Yule said, closing his eyes as he tried to remember the finer details. She killed him with a dueling polearm and dissected him a strike at a time. By the time she caved in his skull, he could do nothing more than cry and crawl. Queen Madmiran nodded.
Killed a fully armored knight in nothing more than doeskin trousers, tall boots, and a duelist shirt. Yes. The nobles nearly revolted on the spot, but Greffer stepped in and was able to broker peace between the houses, splitting the lands in 2 with their own respected bannerlords.
The western region is proving to be a steady thorn in my side, Yule said with an annoyed snort. I thought building those bridges would be enough to sway them, but even still they close ports and other roadways to me, essentially forcing recruits to take the long way around to Penkurth, and won't allow me to properly staff buildings along the road to the harbors of Murstone. Been an absolute pain in my ass the entire time.
They don't like the power you wield, or the change you bring. It upsets the balance of power they have tried very hard to maintain.
Queen Madmiran said, pursing her lips at Yule.
You just ruin everything, like that mean Bannerlord Lenstina.
Hee-ha-ho. Yule muttered, while beside him Alavara chuckled past her fork of stewed beef. You should read the letters they send me about the mercenaries. Apparently I have corrupted them into guerrilla fighters, and they no longer possess the ancient spirit of mercenaries of old. This comment seemed to catch Queen Madmiran's interest, and she perked up slightly, raising her head.
How many mercenaries do you currently wield? At the current time, that is.
Only a handful, Yule said, rotating his hand back and forth quickly. Most of the mercenaries are hired by the nobles or town leaders who are under contract with me, or hired by King Shay. They take care of things that are off the roads and not within range of the local non-Veil Rider military.
You allow them to keep their own armies still?
Queen Madmiran asked with mild interest, as this had been a question that weighed on her mind. Yule nodded. Not in my interest to run their armies. I have an enemy to kill, and that is all. Their forces take care of their own problems, and I worry about mine.
How curious.
Queen Madmiran said quietly in a murmur, sipping her wine thoughtfully. As Yule and Queen Madmiran continued their idle chatter, Alavara began to slowly pick up on a thought that was working around the southern elf. In that regard, there were a lot of thoughts rolling around the dining room, but this one was directed at her. After 10 minutes of the thought constantly whirling around her, she leaned forward slightly to peek around Yule's arm at Queen Madmiran. Alavara slowly chewed through a slice of cheese tart as she tried to focus in on this directed notion. As soon as she felt a grasp on it, it wiggled away like a fish jerking free of a hook, and Queen Madmiran stood as she dabbed at her lips with a napkin. The Queen's face had shifted in tone visibly, and her voice took on an impatient edge.
Yule, would you and your romance care to follow me?
Queen Madmiran inquired, and he blinked a few times at her before standing. Is something wrong? Yule asked her as Alavara stood up behind him, keeping close to his side. Are my soldiers getting too rowdy? Queen Madmiran laughed good-naturedly as her marshal, Cern, also stood up and addressed Yule. I have been getting word from time to time. Your men are just relaxing and enjoying my queen's hospitality. I believe your fellow humans are teaching drinking games to my men who are off duty." "Be careful with that," Yule said with a smile. "You may find them passed out naked in a ditch if they try and keep up with my lads." Alavara leaned around Yule, taking a few steps forward in order to make sure they couldn't miss her.
Is there something wrong, though? Of course not.
Queen Madmiren said with a smile.
Lunch is winding down in preparation for dinner here soon, but I wanted to speak with you both in private.
Yule heard First Sergeant Erinda Caine step up around behind the both of them, her aura a presence that Yule could always feel for some reason. He turned and spoke quietly over his shoulder. "Go and see about the men. Make sure they're taken care of."
Are you sure you?
Erinda Caine murmured low near his ear, and the human nodded.
Very well. Be safe, sir.
"Always am," Yule said dryly, then gestured with a hand towards Queen Madmiren as Erinda Caine turned and walked away. "Lead the way, ma'am." The walk through the castle was marked only by Queen Madmiren, her Marshal Cern, Yule, and Alavara. All of the castle staff too busy with all the guests to pay them much mind. At the same time, the staff concluded where the queen was going along this route and wanted to stay out of her way regardless. Before long, they were at the door that led to the king's current place of rest, and Queen Madmiren turned to look at Yule.
I have a favor to ask,
she said, her voice suddenly becoming both serious and deeply saddened, as if she were coming before the edge of a bridge and looking down at the dark waters below. Yule kept his face still, but did cross his arms as he tilted his head forward an inch. "A favor?"
Yes, a favor.
Queen Madmiren replied, and Cern took a few steps backwards down the hallway, giving the three their space.
I will do everything I can to aid you during your talks with the Serbnians, and I will offer all that I have to you and your men. But I want you to do everything in your power to help my husband wake, if you can.
Yule saw she was looking towards Alavara as she said this, and he turned at the waist, looking to the crimson-haired valley elf beside him. Alavara was wide-eyed, staring at the queen as if she had asked her to strip off her clothing and jump out the nearby window. Yule could see the vein in her neck pulsing quickly, and he uncrossed his arms, reaching out and laying a hand on her shoulder. "Alavara, are you all right?"
What?
Alavara stammered, looking from Yule to Queen Madmiren with uneasy steps.
What do you want me to do?
Queen Madmiren pressed her lips together into an angry frown, her face a mask of desperation.
I know what you are. I know what your people can do.
She then opened the door, exposing her ailing husband and king within.
I will give all in my possession if you will just have him wake. Even just for a moment so I can say goodbye. It's all I ask.
Alavara's brow prickled with sweat, as did her lower back and stomach.
What? Help him wake?
She gave a nervous laugh.
I'm not a blood magician. I don't know any magic.
Yule was staring down at Alavara, his face unreadable, and for the first time since she had known him, there were no thoughts in his mind. Alavara turned around to face him in a panic, placing her hands on his chest and gripping lightly at his uniform.
I don't know any magic. I promise there's no magic in me. I'm just a normal valley elf.
Alavara pleaded, panic growing in her chest like an angrily blooming flower, and her heart hammered madly within her ribcage. She had always hoped that her abilities would never come to light, at least never like this, and now she felt like her life was suddenly set onto the edge of a blade. Queen Madmiren appeared confused, looking from Yule, then to Alavara.
Excuse me. You are blood-touched, hair of crimson and eyes of scarlet. There is nothing else you could be. You are a mind reader, dreamwalker and thought-taker. No, I am not!
Alavara screamed, now clutching at Yule as her red hair clung to her suddenly sweaty face. Queen Madmirren went to stride forward to talk some sense into the elf who was clearly in a blind panic, but Yule held out a hand towards the southern elf, which also stopped Cern from taking another step forward. Yule tilted his head at Alavara, his face stern as she clutched at his uniform. The blind panic that Alavara was in deeply unsettled him, and he figured that this chicken had finally come home to roost. Everyone had been warning him in one way or another, and he always shrugged it off. It never mattered to him anyway. Now that Queen Madmirren was leveraging so much onto this little rumor and had so much conviction in her voice when confronting Alavara, he formed a single thought within his mind. Alavara drew in a shuddering breath, her eyes going wider as tears filled them, and she bared her teeth as she nodded and sobbed out.
Yes.
Yule thought something else, an odd smile on his lips. Alavara sniffed out a jittery laugh, then nodded again.
Yes. The entire time.
The tea?
Yes.
And that thing you do with you. Yule began, but Alavara clapped her hands over his mouth with a hiss as tears dripped down her cheeks.
Yule, are you serious?
Huh. Yule mumbled into her hands, his eyes looking up in thought. Pearlie is gonna be so smug. Alavara leapt into Yule's mind like a startled deer and instantly knew who he was speaking of, as well as their conversation. She went to angrily retort, but quieted down instantly when Yule leaned forward, moved her hands, and gave her a kiss on the forehead. Alavara seemed to wilt as she read his thoughts, but nodded her head, sniffing and putting herself back together while Yule smoothed down his uniform. Queen Madmirren stood by quietly, watching them both closely with quickly darting eyes as she looked between the two of them. Yule used a finger to push some of Alavara's red hair behind her ear, cleared his throat, then nodded pointedly at her. Alavara seemed shocked, if not taken aback. But the two stood in front of each other in silence, Alavara only reacting to Yule's thoughts. After a few minutes of silent communication, Alavara smiled, almost giddily as she wiped at her eyes again, then nodded to Yule with a sniff.
Okay. Are you sure?
I'll be right behind you, Yule said, then nodded to Queen Madmirren. Shall we? Queen Madmirren nearly broke at the knees, only catching herself at the last moment and making it seem as if she was stepping to the side to allow them entry.
Of course, come inside. Cern, watch the door.
Of course, my queen. Cern murmured as he drew his sword, letting it rest on his shoulder as he closed the door behind him. Yule walked up to the end of the bed, his mind buzzing as he still processed the truth behind Alavara, and he tried to keep his cool. He looked down at the Valley Elf, lips pressed together before turning to Queen Madmirren. He is fading.
Yes.
Queen Madmirren said in nearly a whisper, sitting down beside him and laying a hand on his chest.
I fear it may be too long gone now, but I have hope.
Yule looked to Alavara, who was staring down at the man as if she were looking at a ghost, then turned back to Queen Madmirren. We may not be able to do anything. You are aware of this, right? Queen Madmirren swallowed thickly, running a finger along the man's skin-taut jaw as the sun caught her glinting ear caps.
Then nothing changes. Either way, I will keep my word, as you have always kept yours.
Yule crossed his arms, then turned to Alavara. Go ahead, then.
I'll, be gentle.
Alavara murmured, and with a flex of her jaw, the mental tendrils flowed out from her being towards the man on the bed. A few of the tendrils, unseen by all in the room except for her, looped around Yule's waist as if to anchor herself and keep her calm. Alavara worked her tendrils along the man, but no thoughts leapt out at her. No dreams, no nightmares. She didn't even feel the general spark of the mind that nearly all beings had, and she took a step towards the bed.
Yule?
Alavara murmured, looking up at the human with a worried glance. Yule held up a hand and placed a thought into his mind.
Get confirmation. Go as deep as you need to. Also, you and I are going to have a talk later about all this.
Fuck!
Alavara mentally barked out, but put her mind back on task, diving deeply within the seemingly shut-off mind of this stricken king. She worked her tendrils all through the man's mind, but it was quiet. Unnervingly, eerily quiet. There was nothing there. Just an overwhelming sense of emptiness that came to her mind as if she were trying to find her way in a cave deep underground.
There's nothing going on in there. It's quiet.
Alavara murmured, stepping away from the man in the bed. Yule nodded.
Go fetch Erinda.
All right.
Alavara murmured, then hurried over to the door and swung it open, ducking under Cern's arm as he turned around to see what the matter was. When the door closed, Queen Madmiren seemed to deflate. She stared down at the gaunt face of her husband, listening to the light whistle of his labored breathing.
Nothing.
She whispered, reaching down and placing a hand on his cheek.
Not even dreams of me.
Yule chewed on the inside of his cheek for a moment, weighing the scales on whether or not he should even speak, but decided she needed the same thing he did when he went to go confirm the body of his wife.
On our world, we studied the mind quite deeply.
Yule started, taking a few steps over towards the bed and leaning down over the valley elf who lay there.
Delved into the brain and learned what made it work. Sometimes things can cause the mind to just switch off and go to sleep.
Queen Madmiren looked up to Yule, still sitting prettily beside her dying husband and king.
Not even you could wake them?
No,
Yule said matter-of-factly, letting the hard truth settle instead of a gentle lie.
Either we woke up or we never did.
At some point, we would declare brain death on someone who was sick and let them die gently in their sleep. Yule didn't have much longer to speak as Erinda, Caine, and Alavara bustled into the room, and he turned to look at the Oni.
That was fast.
She was standing by the staircase.
Alavara said with a grin, quickly stepping back over to stand beside Yule. First Sergeant Erinda Caine shrugged her shoulders.
Just happened to finish up with my check-in and be in the right place at the right time.
I'm sure, Yule murmured, cocking an eyebrow while Alavara's grin expanded beside him as she read his thoughts openly now.
First Sergeant, I want you to check over this man for what has caused him to go into a coma, a deep sleep.
Ma'am, this is my First Sergeant, Erinda Caine of the Singin Mountain Clan. She is the best blood magician I know.
And what does she know that my own physicians did not?
Queen Madmiren asked Yule, eyeing the Oni warily.
She is a warcaster and knows a few things that everyone else doesn't.
Yule murmured, looking at Erinda Caine with an air of martial pride. Some say it was her will alone that halted the teleportation spell at Tallwheat and held it in place. I know of no one finer, and if there is something at work here, she will find it. Queen Madmiren stared at Erinda Caine for a long moment, then nodded sadly towards the dusky yellow Oni.
I will allow you to see my husband, Miss Caine.
Yes, my lady, of course.
Erinda Caine said, both pleased to be addressed by royalty, as well as swelling with pride from Yule's words.
I will take utmost care.
Erinda Caine pulled around a bright white prayer bead from the many she wore on a cord around her shoulders, and held out the fist-sized bead in front of her as her thumb bled upon it. She moved the orb up and down the body, her brow furrowing.
There's nothing here, my lady. May I dig deeper?
Erinda Caine asked the southern elf.
I need permission.
Queen Madmiren looked down at her husband, his breath nothing more than a silent wheeze, and she gave a short nod to the Oni before her. Erinda Caine cut her thumb deeper, the trails of blood slowly streaming down along the curved surface of the orb, and this time it began to glow with a soft white light. It took a few minutes of Erinda Caine running the orb up and down the body of the stricken king, but she halted near his head and she hummed in her throat. She rustled around in a small pouch at her belt and pulled out a pair of iron tweezers, picking gingerly at the Valley Elf's hair.
I believe a boo was at work here.
Erinda Caine murmured, then let out a pained sigh as she squeezed down on something, pulling a small, black object from his flesh and out of his hair.
And I am correct. This is a bee stinger, a large one.
Queen Madmiren blinked her eyes.
A bee? He has been stung many times by bees. There has never been a reaction like this.
Not just any bee.
Erinda Caine replied as she held the stinger near the glowing white prayer bead.
Orc bees. And this has been enchanted with orc magic. A boo put a spell on this, and the bee delivered it. I am sorry, my lady, but if I had been here sooner, or within a few days of him falling asleep, I could have done something. I'm afraid there's nothing that can be done now. Judging by his current condition, he could pass away within hours, or within the next few passings of the moon.
Queen Madmiren was quiet as Erinda Caine stepped away, wiping her prayer bead clean with the cloth she pulled from the same pouch as her tweezers. She kept her eyes on the man she loved, the man who had made her into more than what she could ever be, and taught her how to do away with old hates and embrace the world anew. She sat next to her husband, running a bent finger down his cheek as a single tear ran down her own, then looked up to Yule.
He'll stop breathing?
Queen Madmiren asked Yule, running her fingers through her husband's hair. Yule nodded, while beside him Alavara was becoming teary-eyed, seeing all of Queen Madmiren's memories. Yes, eventually his body will tire out, and he'll choke. It will be unpleasant.
Is there a better way?
Queen Madmiren asked Yule, tears now falling freely down her cheeks as her last hope died within her heart.
A way where he won't suffer?
Yule looked to Erinda Caine, slowly bringing his hands behind his back. First Sergeant, do you have some Surets?
I do.
Erinda Caine said quietly, rustling around in her many belt pouches until she found her little first aid kit. She untied it, then pulled out 3 green and red tubes that had long metal protective caps.
I believe 3 of these will make it quick.
Yule took the 3 Surets into a hand, one hand still behind his back, then took 2 slow steps towards the falling King Jacoby and Queen Madmiren. My wife died quickly, in her accident, far and away on the other side of the veil. It was painful, but I never had to watch her suffer over time. I cannot imagine the strength you possess to watch someone you love fade away like this. Do you have the strength still, here at the end, to do what needs to be done? Yule asked her, holding out the 3 little morphine Surets. If you don't, I wouldn't even blame you. Queen Madmiren stared for a long, long time at Yule's hand, the echoes of laughter and chatter floating up through the window from the soldiers below.
He would have loved seeing soldiers like yours.
Queen Madmiren said quietly, taking one of the odd little packets.
To have met you, I think. Straightforward and to the point. Nothing like the usual participants of courtly politics.
Yule turned to look at Alavara and Erinda Caine. Nothing about what happens here leaves this room. We were too late to help him, and he was found dead as we entered the room. First Sergeant Erinda Caine then found the stinger during an autopsy. Understood? Alavara nodded even as she cried, and didn't have to imagine what Queen Madmiren was feeling. Erinda Caine held her feelings in check despite the hard look in her eyes, and both of them stood at attention as Yule reached down and slowly unscrewed the cap of the morphine Suret Queen Madmiren held. I won't speak of what happens here, and neither will they, Yule murmured, pulling the cap away and then the secondary guard from the needle tip.
Get in close with him and hold him. Let him feel your skin as he goes.
Queen Madmirren nodded, sniffling as she got in close to her husband, cradling his head against her breasts and not caring that her gown became wrinkled under her. Yule guided her hand to where she needed to place the needle, then moved her hand forward, plunging it into her husband's skin. His weakened body didn't even react, not even a twitch of the brow. She squeezed until the syringe was empty, then Yule took it, handing her another one. This time she pierced his skin on her own, squeezing down until it was empty, and handed it to Yule as he gave her another.
Won't be long now.
Yule whispered quietly to Queen Madmirren as she finished the last dose, handing it to Yule so he could screw the safety cap back on.
His breathing will slow, then his heart will stop. He will feel no pain, no gasping, nothing. He is going to overdose on morphine quite quickly at this stage of ailment and body weight.
Queen Madmirren held her husband and waited, holding his head to her chest as she ran her fingers through his hair. Tears fell down her cheeks as she felt his heartbeat slow, and despite herself, she felt an odd feeling of relief when his breath slowed to nothing. His heart thumped once, twice, then not at all. She sniffed and placed her face in his hair for the final time, breathing in the man she had loved for so long and had had to watch fade away over time due to a booze spell. The room was quiet, the only sounds coming in through the window from those below. The queen took her time, then lifted herself away from the body of King Jacoby, setting his head back down onto the pillow.
Son?
Queen Madmirren said sternly, mastering herself as she sat up from the bed and stood, gathering her strength as her marshal opened the door and stepped in. "My queen?" Cern asked her, his sword still on his shoulder. Queen Madmirren breathed in deep, bringing herself to her full height and holding her hands in front of her with regal authority.
The king has passed. Warlord Yule and his first sergeant having identified that he was stricken by an orc spell cast by a boo. His romance Alavara confirmed that he has passed as well. This is the greatest act of war upon us by the orcs, and the entire land should know of the assassination. I now lead out of revenge for our fallen king, and am working directly with Warlord Yule of the Veil Riders to make sure our people get the recompense they deserve.
Yule pressed his lips together grimly, then looked at Queen Madmirren before turning his eyes to Cern.
"Marshal, the Veil Riders of Coswling Company officially offer their aid to your queen and to her people. Justice for your fallen king shall be administered with brass and lead, should your queen agree to terms."
I agree,
Queen Madmirren said, without even an inch of thought or pause. Cern nodded once at his queen, taking her words for law as soon as he heard them, and placed his sword back into his scabbard with a hiss of metal. "At once, my lady. I will inform the chamber." And that is the end of Chapter 11 of Book 4. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Join the Discord, become a member on the Coffee for sneak peeks and hidden channels on the Discord that lets you see art that's being done and all the works in progress. And I guess follow me on X if you want to. I post dumb shit there all the damn time. The TTRPG book for the Veil Riders is now for sale on Amazon. You can find it and buy it on paperback or buy the PDF on the Coffee. And more or less, there's more lore in the books, more fun stuff. It's a game you can play with your friends. Is it a perfect game? No, it's not a perfect game. We're currently in Iron 1, and likely Iron 2 have a lot of fixes and changes. That's just how things go here. When it's one guy doing the game, there's going to be some things slipping by the cracks. But at the end of videos, we say the names of our members, and the first one up is the First Shirt. These guys give $50 per month and carry the channel upon their shoulders. That's E Machino, Cody Jarrow, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. Then there's the E4 Mafia. These guys help shore up the middle expenses with $25 per month. That's the Great Baguette, the Great Baguette, Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Darkside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. And then there's a lightning round, Snuffy Squad. These guys pay $5 per month. Split Iris Bear, Super Sting 64, Elderock, Crowman, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin Sean Holtz, Andrew N. Gill, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Ranger Uninspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and Ein, the Loresmith. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Rue, that was Technoward, that was Vynn, that was Fire, that was Eliza, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.